All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have episode number 107 today. We're going to be continuing our Ancient Greece series. So this is Ancient Greece Part 3, the Sophists. If you are interested in this subject, we did Part 2 was on Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, and Part 1 was on the pre-Socratic philosophers. So check that out. You can
We'll put some links above.
Yeah, we'll put some links above. Check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/Mike and Maurice. For $2 a month, you'll get some exclusive content, interviews, and audio. Check us out at our website, mikeandmauricemindescape.com. And thank you to a few of our new Patreon members. I believe we have Chris, Lee, and Mr. Ferretti. Thank you very much for your patronage, and so that's it. Also, if you like our content, please subscribe to our channel, and if you're listening
smash that like button.
If you're listening on audio only on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever you're listening to, also subscribe and leave us a nice little review, if you will. So thank you on that, and let's jump into it.
Do it.
All right, so the Sophists. Here's a few things I always throw out there when we're talking about this kind of stuff. Some people might not know what it is, some terminology. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge. How do we know what we know? Ontology is the study of being. Teleology is the study of purpose. And most people might not know what a sophist is. A sophist, or at least back then in ancient Greece, was a type of a teacher that taught philosophy, rhetoric, mathematics, music, and athletics, and some other things depending on like arts, like sculpture, that kind of stuff. So again, they were a type of a teacher during the period of ancient Greece during the 5th and 4th centuries BC. Always for pay, whether they were giving a public speech or teaching students or tutoring some rich and powerful guy's kid. They were always being paid. They were philosophers and intellects. The Sophists would basically teach these young men how to win dialogues and debates using rhetoric, philosophy, natural science, and mathematics. Some would teach athletics and music, depending on what was going on. Plato's dialogue, Sophist, was the first critique of what a sophist actually was. So before Plato's dialogues, sophists were not really thought of in like a negative way, or like, oh, that guy's just doing that for money kind of a thing, or he's got no virtue. He's just
they weren't criticized.
They're just giving knowledge. They're teaching people how to win arguments and give them knowledge to do what they need to do. But ultimately they're not leading these students to what Socrates or Plato or Aristotle would consider true knowledge. They believed being a philosopher was something separate from being a sophist. So again, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are kind of saying, hey, we're different in some ways than these people. Even though a lot of the sophists are intelligent, they are teaching some of the youth. They're not teaching them in a way that is ultimately leading them down a path of, I guess, figuring stuff out themselves. They're just giving them what they need to know.
They're giving them tools to argue, apparently.
Yeah. Again, Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, they believed it lacked virtue since they were teaching these young men rhetoric to be deceptive in dialogues, and again, just to win the debate. So it keeps coming back to this common theme that there was this sole purpose of them doing that, and it was for either money or compensation.
It almost reminds me of those, like a lawyer that is always taking the sketchier cases. They must have had a couple of them that were bad to generate these ideas, though.
Yeah, I would equate it to some other things, but we'll get into that in a little bit.
Like a Better Call Saul type, and then they ruin it for the whole bunch almost.
Yeah, but it's not. I guess I get what you're saying about how in Better Call Saul, Saul's deceptive and he tries to.
He's taking more of the criminal cases, even though
Yeah, I wouldn't even
he
say
may
that
know.
this wasn't criminal what they were doing though. So, but
Right.
it's more of like a moral, ethical type of a thing.
Uh-huh.
So, but it must be also pointed out that Aristotle could be considered a sophist and a
Right.
hypocrite, since he was
Hey.
he was the paid tutor of Alexander the Great. He never actually accepted money from King Philip, who was Alexander the Great's father. But what he did was his hometown was destroyed by King Philip's Stagira in Greece, and he had King Philip like rebuild his hometown basically. So there was some sort of a compensation exchange, but it wasn't him accepting money or becoming rich. It was just, hey, you ruined my hometown. Please come back and fix it, and then I'll teach your son, kind of a thing.
Right, right.
Again, and Athens was the main hub for all these sophists, as well as a lot of the other stuff that was going on during the time. All right, going on to the next one. All right, this is the first. If Thales was the first pre-Socratic philosopher, this guy's the first sophist, and his name's Protagoras. He's written about in Plato's dialogues. He's very well known in this time period.
Is that where protagonist comes from?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know. You could
Let me
probably
see.
look that up.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me, but there's also so many Greeks that have similar names. There could have actually been
Right, right.
a Greek named Protagonist. Okay, so Protagoras lived from 490 BC to 420 BC. He was born in Abdera in Thrace. He was a pre-Socratic philosopher. He was the student of Democritus. Again, Democritus came up with the theory of atoms and this idea that these tiny particles create everything, which we know to be true on some level to this day. Democritus, the story goes, Democritus noticed Protagoras' geometry skills when he made like a bundle of sticks, and he noticed it was put together in these nice geometric patterns. It was very clean. So he took him on as a student and tried to teach him, but he realized Protagoras was not a fan of mathematics.
That's a problem.
Protagoras, he was a friend of Pericles. He was also dubbed as a sophist by Plato. Plato said Protagoras invented the role of being a professional sophist. Let's see here. Protagoras, in Plato's dialogue, is a self-admitted sophist and called it an honorable ancient art that even Homer and Hesiod practiced. It ends with Socrates winning and insisting that if all virtue is knowledge, then it can be taught. Again, we talked about that a little bit in part 2 when we talked about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Protagoras is credited with the first philosophy of relativism based on his most famous quote, "Man is the measure of all things." This would suggest there is no absolute or objective truth and that everything is relative to the individual. So that everything's relative, kind of, people say that kind of stuff. That's where this all originated from. I mean, maybe somebody thought about it before him, but again, that's what he's credited with. But yeah, the man is the measure of all things is his most famous saying. And again, it's this idea that it's all relative to us individually because we're interpreting everything. So,
Right.
You can look more into relativism if you're interested in that subject. It's pretty interesting. Aristotle said Protagoras was criticized for claiming to make the weaker argument stronger. So this would be that, again, as a sophist, they're using deceptive
measures,
deceptive rhetoric. Yeah, they're teaching people, again, how to speak, or they're speaking themselves in a way that they're trying to win the argument.
Right, no matter what's actually truth, they're giving them the faculties to fucking flip it.
Right, and not necessarily they're not necessarily trying to teach them in that way. But so when he's saying to make the weaker argument stronger, again, it's just saying his take on it is not as good as, let's say, Socrates, but he's claiming that it is based on, different things. So in his book on the gods, a treatise he wrote concerning the gods, he said, "I have no means of knowing whether they exist or not, or what sort they may be. Many things prevent knowledge, including the obscurity of the subject and the brevity of human life." So he was a fan of agnosticism, saying that there's no way of knowing the gods if they do exist. So that was kind of his take on it. And for that matter, a lot of these sophists were basically what I would say is you were equating them to Better Call Saul. I would equate them to maybe some modern day tutors or even academics, teachers and professors in college and stuff like that. They're getting paid. I when I say that too, I know teachers care about their students and they want them to do well, that kind of a thing. But there are a lot of teachers, I would suggest, that aren't. It's a job to them. They don't 100% care whether this student is led down the path of enlightenment or true knowledge or whatever. So I could say that, modern day tutors or some academics that don't have the passion for the subjects or whatever might fall into this category because they're being paid. And again, if it depends on your intentions, really, but.
Yeah, also how much you're getting paid will sway you one way or another. If you're getting tons of dough, you're going to be very, very into it.
Well, for sure. I mean, anybody getting paid. I mean, that's the thing that separated Socrates and Plato and Aristotle apart from a lot of these guys. And again, that's why Plato separated certain pre-Socratic philosophers and him and Socrates and everything, and separated them from these sophists, because there is a difference between their intentions of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
So you were saying that Socrates never documented any of his stuff, correct?
No. So Socrates thought it would take away from
the teaching
and everything. Yeah, he thought that it was, I don't know, just almost like.
That's weird, because I would think it's the opposite, because as soon as you pass it on to another person, they're going to put their own spin on it, then so on.
Well,
so
here's
forth.
the thing is, oral traditions are huge, because oral traditions is how we have gotten a lot of this mythology and
of course,
parables and allegories, and whether it's from ancient times or stuff in certain ancient texts. A lot of that stuff is from oral traditions. Somebody just wrote it down. But you're right. Yeah, stuff could get lost in translation. Stuff could get moved around and painted in different lights and stuff like that. I would just say, though, for that kind of stuff, that, again, Socrates didn't need to write anything down because Plato, his student, did. So that was important with that. And there's a lot of debate over what Socrates actually said in certain instances. And
exactly.
Plato wrote certain, like Hippias Major, whether that was 100% Plato, stuff like that. So there are, again, a lot of this stuff is kind of ambiguous because there's no really way of knowing. And think about that. This is only, 4th, 5th century BC. Imagine that we're still trying to interpret stuff from ancient Greece, or ancient Egypt, and just did that episode on Göbekli Tepe. So the further you get away from it, the harder it is to put yourself in that mindset and that consciousness, and then the more stuff is lost through time and
and to piggyback on that, I think it was our uncle was talking about how the way they talk, it may have totally different meanings, even to the words that we are able to transcribe. Yeah, so we don't know.
That's a good point. And actually, there's that's what that movie Arrival is, with that alien.
Yeah.
Where when you start to think like these aliens, your mind starts to process things in a different way, and time, for them, time wasn't linear and that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that, but what you're saying could be something along the same lines, where talking in a different format or something might have had a different effect on your consciousness in some regard.
Well, just think about like slang. That's an easy way to break it down.
Right.
You say
Or
something's bad,
even
it
looking
might
at like a
mean
hieroglyph, it could mean like 10 different things. So,
Right.
okay. So, Gorgias, he lived from 483 BC to 375 BC. That's right. This dude supposedly lived to be 108 years old in ancient times, which is crazy.
I know I'm doing the math in here. I was like, this guy's got a nice little life there.
I'm sure there's some debate around that too. Again, a lot of the stuff's ambiguous, but so pre-Socratic philosopher, sophist, and rhetorician. He was from, and people, I should have put that in the terminology. A rhetorician is somebody that specializes in rhetoric. I'm sure most people picked up on that, but I just wanted to point that out. He was from Sicily. He was a student of Empedocles. We mentioned him a couple times during the pre-Socratic episode, I believe. He is considered the father of sophistry, where Protagoras might have been, the first or whatever. Gorgias was kind of like the top dude that did it. He's kind of like the Socrates of sophistry.
All right.
He was credited with the idea of paradoxical thought and expression. He also developed some rhetorical innovations involving structure. He developed and taught a distinctive style of speaking, and he was good at speaking. So a lot of these sophists were really good speakers. That was part of it. They could teach people how to publicly speak, and we'll get into. There's some of them that started to get into the political realm of things, and but yeah. So, and there's a debate over whether he was a nihilist based on some scholars' interpretation of his work. What the thing that they bring up is this thing called on non-existence, and it's like a lost piece that he wrote, and it says first that nothing exists. Second, that even if it exists, it's inapprehensible to humans, and third, that even if existence is apprehensible, it certainly cannot be communicated or interpreted to one's neighbors. So it's like saying life's unfathomable. There's no way of understanding it, and there's really, but in a way, we know like a nihilist is more, modern days. It's considered something a little bit different, which we talked about in the metaphysical episode that we did.
So he did or he did not believe in God.
No. Well, it's like unknown. It's one of those things where it's probably not the case. He sees no way of understanding or knowing, and just like how Protagoras was more agnostic in the sense that he's saying that there's no way to ever know, Gorgias is saying there's no way to even know what's what at all, pretty much.
It's pretty interesting.
His rhetorical works are an encomium of Helen, which is like a defense of Helen so Helen of Troy is considered this like evil woman who launched 1,000 wars and yada yada yada. We've all heard it. And his encomium on Helen is like a defense of her. So he's saying, I'm so good at rhetoric, I can now even defend Helen of Troy, which nobody could have done, pretty much.
Yeah, isn't that Angelina Jolie?
I don't know what
she was in Troy.
Oh yeah, I forget that. I haven't seen that movie in a long time. Defense of Palamedes, he wrote, and the Ephestaphios, or is it Aphidathios? I think that's how you pronounce that. Plato named one of his dialogues Gorgias based on a Socratic dialogue where sophists are at a dinner party, and again, this is one of the common themes, is Plato going back and forth with the sophists throughout all the dialogues, and Gorgias turns up in a decent amount of the dialogues. I think he's like Meno's teacher, I believe, and he makes Meno even dumber than he already was. And yeah, there's a dialogue called Gorgias, and there's also he's popping up here and there. So Good stuff. Again, if you haven't read Plato's Dialogues, there's some good stuff on there. Obviously, most people know the Republic, but Gorgias is probably one of the better ones in my opinion. And I mean, I guess it just depends on what interests you with all this. But so yeah, he was the top dog. He was, if let's see here, if Socrates is God, then this dude would be the devil, and not in the sense that he's just evil. He's just adversarial.
Well, he promotes all the stuff that Socrates was against.
Pretty much, but again, they
not that they're good or bad.
Right.
It doesn't seem like this is that evil.
I think there's a level of respect, obviously, though, in what they're trying to do. Like Socrates and Plato, they understand what's going on. And I think that, I'll talk about some of these guys. Some of these guys are a little bit dumber than other ones, and some of them are more respected than other ones, and they have different, levels of what Plato, not that Plato's the end-all be-all, but that's how we know a lot about all these people is because of Plato, so...
I just wanted to correct. Angelina Jolie is not in Troy. My bad.
We're trying to do a serious conversation about Sophists, and this kid's bringing up Angelina Jolie.
Right. Well, there's a ton of movies made about this stuff, and they're probably not that accurate. So
Yeah, I get it. All right, Prodicus. So Prodicus lived from 465 BC to 395 BC. He was from Chios or Chios, I don't know how you pronounce that, and came to Athens as an ambassador and to teach. He was a philosopher, speaker, and sophist. Ethics and linguistics were a major part of his teachings and speeches. Some have suggested he influenced Socrates in some way, again, on probably the ethics and linguistics part of it. Plato treated Prodicus better than any of the other sophists and had great respect for him. So again, this is going back to what I just said. There's certain sophists where they are respected by Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, and then there's other ones that they don't care for much at all. We'll get to some of the ones they don't care for, like Hippias and stuff like that. So, but yeah, Plato kind of held him to a different level than the other ones. He's most famous for his speech, the choice of Heracles. So that's something most people won't know. In ancient Greece, the person we know as Hercules was actually named Heracles, and through the Roman Empire, they changed his name to Hercules, and it became more of a universal myth and legend of him. The premise is Hercules is becoming a man and has to choose one of the two paths of life, either virtue or vice. He believed the gods were personifications of the sun, moon, and other natural phenomena. And so not much about a lot of these sophists. Again, what we know is a lot of it's from Plato. I think Xenophon's Memorabilia has some stuff in there. So it's just one of those things where
it could be swayed one way or another.
There's just not a ton of information to paint the full picture on some of these people, and there's even less information on some of the other people we're going to get to, as you'll see. But
so most of these dudes lived at the same time, Plato and
either
Gorgias.
A little bit before, a little bit after. Well, so the Sophists kind of came around. So what led the way for Sophists would be like what we talked about during the pre-Socratic episode, would be this idea of like Ionian physics, which is more of that natural phenomena is at the core of what's going on, as opposed to, let's say, like Plato's forms, where there's all this metaphysical talk. Where, you get what I'm saying? Like Ionian physics and like more of these natural sciences led the way for these sophists to come around and say, oh, I know this about the world, or this is what we know, kind of a thing. So it's like using what we know. Again, I would equate it to being a modern educator or academic. And then there's a lot of good academics out there that care, that aren't this, but there's some that are using what we know today to make money and also help young people win arguments, get jobs, do all these different things. And so it becomes kind of a gray area thing, in my opinion, where it's needed. Young people need jobs. Young people need to learn these skills. But it's when you go back to ancient Greece, it was like one guy teaching one person at a time, or a couple people at a time, or maybe one dude speaking in a small crowd. There was a lot more like personal attention. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
It's different now. You have so many people. It's hard, I'm sure, to care that much and keep track.
Well, that's the biggest problem in the school systems, especially around around me in Detroit. It's the teacher to student ratio, and then you don't get, like you said, you don't get the attention, and you probably don't learn as well if it's a class of 30 or a class of 10.
Yeah, and again, it's nothing personal. It's just when you divide the time of one person between 30 individuals, and then you have 7 of those classes a day, it becomes a little crazy.
Right. Plus, the population's growing. That's a good reason to get into the teaching industry.
And I'll point it out too. It's not even necessarily that the sophists were bad people. Some of them didn't had bad intentions, but some of them were just good dudes that just wanted to get paid for their knowledge, or to help people speak better and win arguments and that kind of a thing. So it's a gray.
And that's just like all humans.
Yeah, again, it's a gray area. But again, Plato did that for a reason, where I do think there are people with true intentions. Okay, so we started this podcast to what was the basis I said from the beginning? Let's get the friend, let's go to
explain things that science cannot.
That, and have smart people on that are part of
community.
Well, no, let's have people on that are interesting, whether they're academics or fringe researchers or people that have had weird experiences or whatever, and just put credible information out there, because there's a lot of BS. So, but the whole point of this was to put information out there that we think is valid. Now, we could be wrong. I'm not claiming that what we're putting out there is right or the right path or anything like that, but just I think on my own path of enlightenment, these are important things to know and learn. How does the mind work? Where do our modern thoughts come from? That kind of stuff. So that's why we're talking about this. And I think our intentions were true and good, and we have our Patreon and things like that. We're asking for donations. We're not requiring them. So
right. That's secondary to the learning. So that's good.
And again, this is our journey, and if I'm glad people are hopping along on the ride for it. And again, we appreciate people listening and stuff, because this is just the stuff that interests us, that we want to know, and we find it flattering that people are actually taking notice and enjoying the ride themselves. So,
for sure.
All right, let's go to Hippias. So this is one of the dudes that isn't really, he wasn't really well liked, you could say. He lived during the late 5th century BC. He was a philosopher and rhetorician. He had a wealth of knowledge, and he was a peer of Socrates. He would teach and lecture on grammar, history, mathematics, poetry, and politics. Plato thought he was arrogant, self-centered, and wrote the dialogues Hippias Major and Hippias Minor based on those qualities that he had. Especially, I think Hippias Minor was specifically more about him being kind of vain, I guess it would be a good word. He was credited with the concept of natural law, and the idea that natural laws are objective and universal and independent of human understanding. So again, this is another dude that thinks, the law of nature kind of a thing, that there's all these laws that are governing what happens whether we're here or not, if that makes sense. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, kinda.
Because some would argue that without the observer, which would be us, we're the only living things in the universe that we know of, right? That are intelligent, other than the animals and stuff like that. But just take us for an example. If we didn't exist, he's saying that stuff would still exist. Well, there would be an argument. Well, for instance, I I'm trying to think of how to.
So yeah, like if a tree fell in the woods.
Okay, so that's a good example. So if a tree fell in the woods, we know that without humans, it would just be vibrations. You need humans' ears, which pick up vibrations and transmute it into the sound or the noise that we're hearing as a frequency. Without us, it's just vibrations. It's just energy.
Yeah.
So so if a tree falls in the wind, there's nobody here. Does it make a sound? No, it doesn't make a sound, but it makes vibrations.
Okay.
Let's see here. But yeah, so he's basically saying he's like a materialist. He's saying that the only thing that exists and is matter, and matter is governed by all these natural laws, and they're universal, and they exist independent whether we're here or not.
So that could apply to the simulation theory.
No, I don't think so, because it's not. Well, again, that's dicey, because what is a simulation?
Well, I'm just saying that there's something set up and there's rules to it.
Again, for a simulation, we've talked about this. For a simulation to even exist, it has to be a copy or a recreation of something that already exists.
Okay, yeah.
So you can't just come up, oh, it's a simulation. Well, what is it a simulation of?
Well, when you say like the things apply to rules, that's what I kind of think of, that there's something that's been implemented.
Well, you could,
and then within that world or universe, certain laws apply.
Okay, so you could look at it like, okay, so I guess maybe you're programming a video game, okay? The natural laws would be in the video game would be that dude can only jump this high, and he can only jump at this angle, and he can only. So if you want to look at it like that, I guess that would be a good analogy, but it's not. It's the simulation theory is actually a lot different than what I'm saying. But
okay, well, no, but that's what I think about, because then when you talk about people that you're like, why did this person die, or why did this person get a disease or something? If there is a God, well, he created this world for us to live in.
Right.
Now, all the things that happen inside that world, he can't mess with. If you're gonna, get hammered and go drive your car, then you might pass away.
Right.
He doesn't have control over that. He just put the building blocks in play, and then from there we run with it. But he can't mess around with the video game once it's already set up.
Yeah. Again, this is just saying that there's these natural laws. So like gravity, if I throw my phone up in the air, it's gonna fall.
Right.
And whether I'm here or not, let's say an animal tossed or flung something up in the air, it's gonna happen whether we're there or not. There's a physical world outside of our, independent of our being, and that the things are governed by certain laws, is what it's saying.
Okay.
Does that make
sense?
sense?
There doesn't need to be the observer for the things to happen around it.
Right. I mean, that's a whole different other story, because you can go down the rabbit hole with that one. Does anything even need to exist for this thing to still be there? And you can't answer it. There's no way to answer it, because even if everything's here now and we're observing it, we wouldn't know what would happen if nobody was there,
not observing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Strange.
And okay, so yeah, Hippias wasn't well liked. Plato wrote Hippias Major, Hippias Minor. Also, there's some that suggest that Hippias's knowledge, while he had like a ton of it, was superficial and it lacked depth in subjects. So you could say that maybe since he was he had such a wealth of knowledge and it was spread so far over different subjects, that maybe he overextended himself and didn't really understand some of them, is how I would interpret that. And I look at that now. I try to avoid that myself. So so this podcast, we do a decent amount of different topics. Most podcasts have one specific focus, whether if it's a comedy podcast, everybody's trying to be funny. If it's a philosophy podcast, people are just talking about philosophy the whole time. We cover philosophy, psychedelics, the mind, consciousness, space, the universe, ancient civilizations, esoteric stuff. We cover so many different things that when I learn one of these, so we're doing this series on ancient Greece. This is what I was reading at the time. I was reading all the books. I was doing all the research. I was also listening to audibles and different translations on things. So you want to get a good overview of the subject. But if, I've listened to plenty of podcasts, and sometimes there's people that skim over stuff, or you can tell that they don't have a tenuous grasp on what they're talking about. So
Right.
we try not to do that. I push myself not to do that. It would be easy to just pull one of these topics up and just start talking about it, but it's another thing to actually research it and kind of go through it the way that we're going through it systematically. The reason why I'm doing that with these slideshows is to so people can look at the visuals if you're on YouTube, and if you're listening, it's something interesting to listen to in somewhat of a chronological order and systematic order.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and then you have the document to go back to if you need to touch up on things.
Yeah, but again, he most likely was kind of like a jack of all trades. So you can be good at like 100 things, or you can be great at like one thing. What do you think about that as far as that kind of stuff goes? Do you think it's better to be really, really good or great at one thing, or do you think it's good to have like a general base?
I don't know. I wrestle with that all the time between landscape photography, writing the comedy, this show. But I think the human brain can handle a lot of things. I think the human brain's capable of doing stuff that we're not even fully tapped into at the moment. But at the same time, if you look at people that are great, we'll take like a Marlon Brando, or actually Jared Leto would be a good example, because he's a really good actor, but is he a very good musician? Some people would say yes, some people would say no, but I think most people would agree that he's not as good of a musician as he is of an actor.
Sure.
So even if you do wear a lot of different hats, you're usually going to gravitate towards one thing. That being said, you can be good at a lot of different things, especially with art, such a big umbrella. Jim Carrey is a phenomenal actor, and he also is a pretty damn good painter. So when you're creating art, if you figure out how to tap into that.
Truly a comedian, though.
Well, yeah, that too, but I've seen him in some serious movies, like The Truman Show. When he's under that, he's playing a real role. He's pretty dang good at it. So I think that he's actually been able to tap into the artistry, whether he's playing Man on a Moon, and he's taking the embodiment of what was that guy's name?
Oh,
the guy from Taxi. Andy Kaufman. If you watch the documentary about that, this guy really got into that role. So I just feel like whatever he dives into, he goes balls to the wall. And I think it's possible to be good. It's rare, but I do think you could be good at a lot of different things. But you were saying be great. I think you got to spend those 10,000 hours on something to really become a master.
I've really been thinking about that too. While I agree with you on the one point that to truly be like next level, you got to really focus on that one thing, I think it can also be detrimental in some ways. And I'm just going to point that out. So like if you are for me, I mean, I would be obsessive. I've been obsessed my whole life. I wanted to learn a guitar. I'm going to sit there for 7 hours, and I did, and I got pretty good. And we were playing in bands and playing out live a lot, and really molding my skill after who I thought were some of the best people, and then trying to push that. The problem with that is you can go down that rabbit hole where it's so intense and you're doing it so much that the rest of your life lacks. And you become less inspired. So as a musician, I'm sure you know this, the more you like practice certain songs, or maybe you're writing a song and it's just becoming frustrating, you kind of lose a little bit of the creativity, as where if you put it down, let's say I was trying to learn a song, I couldn't figure it out. I put the guitar down, I go out, or I go to work, or I go to the park or something, I come back and all of a sudden it comes easier to me. And I think that's how you would look at that, is a lot of these things in life, where it's almost like a nice mix is better, in my opinion, from what I've been doing. I love music, and I still once in a while will play the guitar.
Yeah, I think you can be worn out with something for sure. Look at Jerry Seinfeld. He talked about it. Well, when he was making Seinfeld, he was so intensive that he pretty much burned himself out on it, and he hasn't made a show set. Well, he has that Comedians in Cars thing, but that's just a whole nother. It's not on a set.
Right.
It's more free flowing and things like that. But Yeah, I think you can wear yourself out. Music's really hard because when you're working on a song day in, day out, and you hear it a million times, the magic from that tune's gone. So then you really have to you really have to trust your instincts that the song's even good in the first place, because
Right.
the beauty of it's kind of thrown out the window. Same thing with jokes. You tell a
Right.
joke, you start crafting the joke. You got to really believe in yourself, because the joke, the laugh, the magic behind it goes out the window after you hear it 50 times. So,
Well, no, and,
yeah,
and
it's interesting.
but again, it comes back to this thing where it's like, do you want to be the Michael Jordan of something, or do you want to be, you know, some dude that's, I don't even know who to, like a Rick Fox, where you're a basketball player. No, that's a bad example because he wasn't really that good at basketball. But it's just somebody. Okay, so like,
Some high school basketball
well, when I say Michael
coach.
Jordan, this guy. He was first of all naturally talented, but then he also the hours. I'm sure that he must have put into all the little moves and the little
Yeah, I mean, they were
fakes
talking
and
about Kobe Bryant wouldn't leave.
oh, Kobe
Even when the
Bryant too,
new
great example. These dudes were masters of their craft, and they put in the time and they put in the hours, and it showed off. They or it paid off. They've won, both won tons of championships, and they did an amazing job. Where Michael Jordan might be considered the best, Kobe Bryant second best, and they both had incredible work ethic. So I think work ethic is definitely part of it.
That's a skill. Well, it's like
It is.
everybody
It is
I
a
feel
skill in itself. I don't. I personally, I have to push myself. I don't have good work ethic, and I don't think that's a secret to anybody that actually knows me in real life. We do this show, and I because it's my passion right now. I definitely put more effort into this than any of the other extracurricular stuff I do. But at the same time, it's just one of those things where you're right. Work ethic itself is actually a good skill to have, and it's something that you have to work at. I think I don't know if people are born with that, to be honest.
Well, the first thing I would say is figure out what you're have some kind of inkling at. So if you can draw, a bird pretty accurately, you go, "Oh, I'm a pretty good artist." That's step one. Now, to become a Da Vinci or a Monet, you got to really take it to the next level. That's when this persistency of your skill comes in. So it's not just being okay at it, because someone that's worse of a drawer at first than you, they might have that other skill of putting in the hours and crunching and really crunching down and putting in the effort, then they'll surpass you sooner or later. So it's the weighing of both those things. Obviously, Michael Jordan, he was decent at basketball, or he was better than decent. He was good.
He was
He had an
decent.
affinity. He had an affinity for it. No, but wasn't he the one that like didn't make his like high school team or
Yeah,
something?
yeah, yeah.
So
But
obviously there was a point where the skill has to meet the work, and that's where these people excel at. Because otherwise, I think that's what I think the real gift is. Because there's so many people in the world. I truly think that everybody could be great at one thing, but it comes down to the point where, what are you going to do on a Friday night? Are you going to sit there and shoot a million free throws, or are you going to go out with your friends and have some brews?
right,
That's where the genius comes in.
right. No, I 100% agree. I've always, me, I've always been that kind of person. I've never
Uh-huh.
been a real big partier, or even during our party days, I was always kind of, you know.
Well, I'm not saying going out and having a brew once in a
No,
while
but
is the end of the
but
world.
for years, no offense, but when you were partying, I mean, I was doing this kind of stuff, not necessarily this specifically, but whether it was playing the guitar and playing in bands and practicing a few times a week, or recording music, or all that kind of stuff. While you were doing that's what I was doing, and I'm not doing any of that now, so it's almost like a waste of all that time and energy. But I think that's part of what you're saying. It's like there is this one thing that everybody is good at or can do, and for music, I felt like I was good, but I wasn't good enough to be one of the greats, and it's so hard to get discovered as it is, to then think that you were going to get discovered. Even if you're good, is a different story. I know people that are phenomenal at the guitar that don't even play in front of people, so it's just one of
Oh,
those things.
probably some of the best musicians are the ones we don't even know about.
Exactly. When I worked at Guitar Center when I was younger, there'd be 6-year-olds coming in that were better than some 30-year-olds sometimes that had been playing for 20 years, and there were some people that just would blow your mind from time to time. You're like, how are you not famous? So that exists out there for sure. We got off topic though, so let's get back on here. We'll go to the next slide.
That's the Friday Ram with Mike and Maurice.
So Hippias, not a good dude. All right.
And I love bringing the words back. Is that where hippie came from?
No. You think everything's derived? Like Greek is just the basis for everything. So pronounce this guy's name. I'll give you a guess.
Trust me, bro. You don't want
all right.
this dyslexic man over here.
So now we've come to Thrasymachus. Okay?
Oh Jesus.
Thrasymachus lived from about 459 BC to 400 BC. He was from Chalcedon or Chalcedon. His name translates to savage or fierce fighter in ancient Greek. Most of his life was spent as a sophist in Athens. Plato noted him a successful rhetorician in the Phaedrus, which is one of his dialogues. He was also a character in Plato's Republic who was portrayed as willing to say anything to defend his position. He was very violent, towards Socrates. He also demanded payment before responding to Socrates. So that's a real sophist right there.
Oh yeah.
And Aristophanes, I'm sorry, or is it it's Aristophanes. Made reference to him in one of his plays, I believe.
So there still could be this guy could be real or false.
What do you mean?
Based on he was a character in two of these.
No, okay. So when I say character, I mean he's really lived, but Plato wrote these dialogues as what he would imagined have happened if Socrates had entered into a dialogue with Thrasymachus or Protagoras or one of he took like the personality of these people and who they were, their essence, and then intertwined it into his writing.
Made a fictional story.
Well, it was basically all of Plato's dialogues all have Socrates, and he's always going back and forth with a lot of these sophists. Some of them are students, some sophists, some other people, politicians. So it just depends.
But he uses Socrates as a vehicle to interject his views, correct?
Yes, and he even critiques himself in some of the dialogues. So there's like one where he'll even critique his own theory of forms and what that means. Is it real? That kind of a thing. So he critiques other people. He critiques himself. He critiques Socrates in some parts. So it just depends. But yeah, he's taking.
Well, that's good that he's not so full of himself that he can't poke into his own views.
No, but that's this idea of true knowledge, and that's where a lot of these sophists would kind of come undone, is when Socrates would start applying the Socratic method and getting them deep down the hole, and he would catch him on something, and then he would question that, and then they would ultimately be kind of cornered and be faced to either admit that they're wrong or they would divert. And so again, it's just one of those things where, you were asking about Plato writing, but so again, Plato wrote all these. They are characters, but they're based on people. So that should answer your question. And some of them are ambiguous. There's plenty of these people that I've looked up where it's like, this guy may or may not have existed, but if he did, this is when he would have lived, and it's one of those things. So,
well, I was just thinking maybe that could be the case with Thermatic. What's his name?
Thrasymachus.
Thrasymachus, just because he's a character in multiple different stories.
Yeah. No,
I don't know.
Again, that's what I meant by character. So no, but that's good that you pointed that out, 'cause there's some people probably listening that have no idea. All right. Then we get to Lycrophon or Lystrophon. He was a student of Gorgias. Aristotle called him a sophist, Aristotle also mentions him in Aristotle's treatise Politics. He may have been one of the first proponents of a social contact theory. He said communion is the cause of the unity of knowledge and the soul. He pondered whether part and the whole are one or more than one. So that's kind of confusing, but I guess it makes sense when you read it. He pondered whether the part and the whole are one or more than one. So it's an interesting way to think about it. So if you took the earth and then the universe, is that one or is that more than one? I guess kind of the thing. That's how I read that. All right, let's move on here. That one didn't have much beef, but we'll get to this guy, Antiphon. Lived from 480 BC to 411 BC. He was from Rhamnus. He was known as Antiphon of Rhamnus, or Antiphon the Orator. He was the first of 10 Attic orators and logographers. He went... a logographer is somebody that writes speeches for people. I should put that in the terminology too. He was active in the political scene in Athens. He was a statesman and a rhetorician. He may have invented giving political speeches in front of people, so he might have been one of the first guys to get up in front of a audience or a group of people and speak on politics. Let's see here. There is a long-standing controversy over whether he is the author of some of the sophistic works, including a treatise called Interpretation of Dreams. Some suggest there was another Antiphon. So I guess, this is saying that Antiphon, there could have been two Antiphons. This Antiphon that was good at speaking and political speaking and writing speeches and stuff, and a different Antiphon that was more of a sophist, probably teaching something along those lines. But it could be him too. Again, this is the ambiguity that I was talking about before with all this stuff, where you can cross references. You can look at Wikipedia, you can look at the Britannica, you can look at some of the commentaries and the Audible stuff and all that. It all kind of circles around the same information. Let's see here. He was a professional speechwriter for incompetent people, so if somebody had to speak in front of people, he would help them, that kind of a thing, for pay.
That's still going on today.
Yeah. Most of the politicians, I assume, have speechwriters. I'm sure there are some that write their own, but I would imagine.
Well, they definitely have an editor. I know that.
Yeah. So that's that dude. And here we get to Cratylus, one of your favorites.
Yeah, baby.
We mentioned Cratylus a couple times during the pre-Socratic episode. He lived in the mid to late 5th century. Some suggest he was somewhere around the age of Socrates or Plato. According to Aristotle, who mentioned Cratylus in his treatise Metaphysics, Plato was interested in Cratylus's philosophy before he found Socrates. So Cratylus had somewhat of an impact on Plato. He was a student and a follower of Heraclitus, Heraclitus's teachings and philosophies. In Plato's dialogue, Cratylus, he and Hermogenes ask Socrates if names are natural or conventional, and whether language is meaningless or is meaningless, or do words have some intrinsic connection to the things that they represent. So he, in Plato's dialogue, he's talking about how he's asking Socrates, so your name's Maurice. Is there some quality of your being that connects to this word Maurice, or is it just some arbitrary
Bark?
Yeah.
It's a good thought.
And for that matter, we've talked about this too, is language that is in the same boat. Is language, does it even mean anything, or is it just this thing that we participate in that organizes and creates and that kind of thing. So Heraclitus claimed that we talked about this in our pre-Socratic episode. Heraclitus claimed that one cannot step twice into the same stream. Cratylus took this idea even further and stated that it could not even be done once, according to Aristotle. So Aristotle said that Cratylus was saying that, because Cratylus was a big fan of Heraclitus, but Cratylus is saying that you can't even step in the same river once, meaning, I think you know what that means, but if not, so Heraclitus is saying once you step into the river or the stream, and you take your foot out and you put it back, it's not the same stream.
Right.
And Cratylus is saying that the first time you put it in there, it isn't even the same stream, because I don't know what his idea was, but I mean, if you think about it, water's always rushing. It's never this one thing. It's constantly changing. So, Cratylus's philosophy has been influential on a lot of Eastern philosophy. So again, he had a big impact on people. Not a ton known about him, but that's pretty much the gist of his info. And finally, we get to the Second Sophistic. So,
that was the first wave.
Yeah, that was the first wave. So we have all of the ancient Greeks from, like I said, the 4th and the 5th century BC. And then there was kind of a revival after. So there was a revival of Sophism during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD after Rome overthrew the Greek Empire at the Battle of Corinth in 146 BC. The second the revival of Sophism, the focus was oratory and rhetoric. So again, political speaking and rhetoric were kind of the main hubs of this revival. It was a mix of Greek and Roman sophists during this period. The inspiration was the first wave of the Greek sophists, so a lot of the inspiration and the knowledge and the ideas and the rhetoric and all that stuff was kind of taken from the first period. Some noble sophists from this period were Philostratus, Herodes Atticus, Aelius Aristides. I don't know how to pronounce all these names.
Yeah, God bless you for even attempting.
Favorinus, Lucian, Plutarch, Nicetas of Smyrna, and Chrysostom, I believe is how you pronounce that name. Cicero, who's a famous Roman philosopher, blamed Plato for creating the negative attitude towards sophists. Cicero was a rhetorician and part of the revival of Sophism. So Cicero is saying that if Plato didn't portray the sophists in a negative light, there wouldn't be this issue with the whole thing. But he blames Plato for separating philosophy and sophistry. Let's see here. Roman elites preferred to be taught Greek history over their own Roman history. So that's what I was talking about, how they took a lot of the teachings and stuff from the first wave of the ancient Greek sophists, and then that way of thinking. They obviously saw some sort of value there over their own history. So, and that's pretty much it.
Beautiful.
Do you have any other questions or?
No, that was a good little lesson on all the sophists.
The sophists.
I still think about what Plato's deal, or not Plato, what Socrates' deal was. Like, was there some sophist must have did something wrong to him, or?
Well, if you actually read the dialogues, he's not like mean to any of them. They're not. It's not like it's a dialogue is not a debate. Not even necessarily. It's not. It is in a way, but it's a debate something different. A debate takes into account like emotions and your appeal to certain things. A dialogue is just straight back and forth trying to get at truth, kind of a conversation. And a lot of the stuff when he gets into these dialogues with people. He's just asking them questions to help understand where they're coming from, but also start to transition them into answering what he wants to know, which would be, what do you think about this topic? And then if they, so for instance, if he, let's say he's having a conversation with Protagoras, they're debating on virtue and all this stuff, and then Protagoras is saying, yeah, I teach a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and there's some of the sophists would appeal to what they knew Socrates would want to hear to kind of get them out of the woods a little bit. However, he's going to keep driving home that point until he gets at what he's getting at. So like in the Protagoras, the whole point was to get at the fact that if all virtue is knowledge, then it can be taught.
Okay.
So if he's always trying to get to the point where he's not winning in the sense like, oh, I got you kind of a thing. It's more of like
a collective understanding.
He's helping people arrive at like a new, almost like a paradigm shift in a way. Maybe not been as severe, but like, oh, okay. It's the thing where you get to the end and you're like, oh, that makes sense. Or, oh, that person got me. Have you ever had a discussion or a debate with somebody where at the end you're like, oh, they just got me. That was better than what I had to say, that kind of a thing. It's
of course, yeah.
Socrates was always kind of coming out on top in that regard because he wasn't doing it for money, and he wasn't doing it. He actually has thought deeply about these topics and these subjects, so he knows where to go with them. Whereas some of these people, again, there's maybe a surface knowledge, or maybe they do have true knowledge, but since the intent's not pure, then there's still that Socrates will always have that ethical upper hand or that moral upper hand.
All right.
And he's not accepting money, so all of this is because he has a love of wisdom and knowledge. So and again, and the reason why he didn't write anything down is 'cause he thought it would take away from, he wasn't a fan of writing. So, and some people weren't, and there's a lot of there's something to be said about oral traditions as well too. So but that's kind of that. So this was part 3. Again, if you're interested in this stuff, we did a part 1 on pre-Socratic philosophers, some of the first philosophers of ancient Greece. Part 2 was on Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And
yeah, maybe we can build a little playlist for them.
And number 3 is going to be, that's not a bad idea. Number 3 is going to be on megalithic structures.
No, the sophist is number 3.
Or sorry, number 3 was the sophist. Number 4 is going to be megalithic structures of Greece, and then I think number 5 is going to be the Eleusinian mysteries, and number 6 is going to be mythology, Greek mythology. So
nice.
If somebody has another suggestion too of some interesting part of ancient Greece that they want to see covered, send us a message or something. We'll try and throw it in there.
Squeeze it into an episode too.
But that's what I'm thinking is, a 6-parter with those are the main ones that interest me. So.
Well, I think you've covered a lot of the stuff and all the stuff we haven't. We'll get to in the next 3. Halfway through this little mind journey. You're on Mind Escape.
And then we'll move on. We'll do ancient Egypt and maybe ancient Rome too, and we'll go through some of the ancient civilizations and do it that way.
Very good, sir.
But yeah, so check us out at Patreon at patreon.com/Mike and Maurice for $2 a month. You'll get some exclusive content and interviews. We do recently, I just put one up, an extension of with Laird Scranton from the episode we did with Laird on Göbekli Tepe. Also, there is a extra little bit there on there with Bruce Fenton, I believe. And so yeah, there's some newer stuff I've put up there, and we'll be adding stuff on there here in the next couple weeks as well. So check that out. And again, thanks to our new patrons, Chris, Lee, and Mr. Ferretti, and that's it. Oh yeah, like us on here and hit the subscribe button, because I don't say that enough, even though we're not really after that sort of thing. But
right, but we need to feather it in throughout.
And if you're listening to this on an audio podcast, please subscribe. And if you're listening on iTunes, please leave us a nice little, review. So, and that'll do it. Have you guys a happy
Beautiful weekend.
Yeah, happy beautiful weekend, and stay warm if you're in the cold, and stay cold if you're in the warm.
Yeah, we're almost out of this. The sun hasn't shined in weeks, so we're looking forward to that.
Take that vitamin D, folks. If you're in the Midwest, keep taking that vitamin D.
I know. I gotta take your advice and pump myself full of that stuff.
Get a little bit of vitamin D, a little magnesium. You get a little bit, a little bit of everything.
Good.
All right, you guys have a good weekend. Peace.
Cheers.